Well, hello, it's Pastor Doug, and I'm here to tell you another story. And I hope that you've been enjoying these and that you've been learning more about your walk with the Lord along the way, besides just some stories about Jack. This is time whenever Jack has decided to go out and seek his fortune. His brothers, Will and Tom, they was a-doing pretty good, and his mama was doing well herself. But Jack, he just wanted something more. He'd had so many adventures and seen so many things. He was just ready for something else to take place. And so he just started to wandering. He started wandering out into the woods, and as he did, he noticed a great big old bear. That bear didn't notice him, and so Jack just decided he'd follow it along. Why, that bear was going down the hollows and up around the logs, and it found itself a great big old bush, and then it started crawling up a little bit of a tree, and it had a branch that was coming out. On the end of that branch was this great big old round looking thing that, why, Jack had never seen anything like it in his whole life. That bear was a-reaching out with its paw and trying to whack it, and it would just rock a little bit. Seemed like that bear wanted it awful bad. He was a-searching for it and trying to reach out and grab it, and Jack was just mesmerized by watching it work so hard. And then finally it got hold with its one claw, grabbed hold of it, popped it right off, and there was this great big old buzzing bees going around it, and that bear just had the best look on his face, and he started a-making his way on three paws, as it were, and he was holding on to that great big old thing that we know what is, but Jack had never seen one. He didn't know what it was. And as that bear was going along, all of a sudden, that bear stumbled and fell and smashed that hive, and it just went, oh, honey, everywhere. Why, that bear tried to lap up as much as it could, but it couldn't get it all, and now there was dirt all in it, but it lapped it up anyway, and then finally it just rolled over and said, "Oh, misery, misery on me. Why do I have so much misery? Oh, Bluebeard, isn't there anything you could do? You sent me here when I needed something. You showed me the way, and then I stumbled and fall and ruined it. Oh, it's nothing but misery. Oh, look at all this misery, misery all the way around me." The old bear finally got upset enough, and it just went on its way. Why, a talking bear didn't surprise Jack. He'd seen giants and witches and bulls and all kinds of things talk. But he just decided to go figure out what it was that was making this bear so miserable. And so Jack got down there, and he looked around, and there was still plenty of that old hive left, and the bees were already gone by then, and Jack just put his hand in and touched some of that golden, slobbery looking stuff and said, "Oh, misery is sweet." And he touched it down there. That's what that bear called this stuff all around here, so that's what it's got to be. And he got him a little more. Oh, I love misery. He just got what he could. He couldn't even help himself. He'd spit the rocks and the dirts and everything out, but he ate everything that was left. And he just couldn't believe it. He says, "Oh, I don't know where I could ever get me some more misery like that, but if I ever run into old Bluebeard, I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask him for some misery." And so Jack just went off down to the woods. Not quite often, like Jack would occasionally, he'd run into fellas out there, and sure enough, as it was a-getting dark, he didn't really want to be out in the woods all by himself with bears and all in it, especially talking ones. You no telling what those things might do to you. And so he noticed a little flicker of a fire, and as he got closer, that fire was a-lighting up a window, and as he got closer to that window, he could see that there was someone a-warming himself and working away in it, and as he got closer, sure enough, he could see that that fella on the inside had a long blue beard. Why, Jack just hollered out, didn't want to scare him or anything, says, "Hey, Uncle, you got any place for a fella to stay tonight? I'm out here all alone and I don't want to get in trouble. Just hoping that you might open the door and let me in." Why, the door swung right open. That little old blue-bearded man with that blue beard went all the way down nearly to the ground and curled around, just stepped out and said, "Why, it's Jack. Come on in, Jack. I haven't seen you for days and months and years. Why, what you been doing, Jack?" Jack says, "Oh, you're not going to believe it. I decided I'd go out and seek my fortune again. I often have a good luck, if nothing else, a great adventure. And why, I stumbled upon an adventure this time the likes I had never heard of." And that old Bluebeard says, "Oh, tell me about it. Tell me about it." Says, "Well, I was out there and I seen this great big old bear," and he told him about the bear and told him about that thing it was a fighting with and how it knocked it down and how it was just misery and all over the place and how he tasted it. And why, he said, "Oh, I'll tell you what. He even mentioned that you were the one that got him to where he could get all that misery." And that blue-bearded man said, "Yeah, I am. I gave that bear directions right where he could get to what he really wanted, but I don't really recall it being misery." "Oh, that's what he said. I'm sure it was, and I want you to do the same for me if you're willing. I want to get that kind of misery. I just want to fill up with that misery. I want to have that kind of misery and take it back home. I'd be like a wealthy man if I had that kind of misery in my life." That old blue-bearded man just looked at Jack, says, "Are you sure this is what you're wanting?" Says, "Oh, I do. I want some misery." And he says, "Well, if misery's what you want, misery's what you're gonna get." And he went over to the backside of his cabin and rattled around and come out with a little bit of a poke, little sack, and it's tied up with a bit of a rope. And he says, "Now, Jack, you just take that and you take it far deep into the woods where there's nobody around, so nobody else will be bothered by what's going to be happening to you." And he says, "Oh, I won't. I'll be glad to do it. Yes, sir, all out there by myself. But I'll be able to get it back, won't I?" He goes, "Well, I'm not so sure about that, Jack. But I'll tell you what. If you ever get too much misery, you just holler out and, well, I'll just keep an eye on you and see if I can't make myself available, and just in case you don't really want what you're asking for." Jack says, "Oh, I can just see it now. I can just taste it now. Oh, I just can't wait for it. I'll do exactly what you said." And so the next morning, after that blue-bearded man fixed up a nice breakfast for Jack and sent him on his way, Jack started trying to find the furthest place he could possibly be. Why, he went all the way down through the valley where he started getting up to the mountains. And as he started getting up to the mountains, he got up to the higher part of the mountains. Why, when he got up to the higher part of the mountains, he started looking around for a great big old cave. When he got up there and he found that cave where not even the wind was a-blowing in, he made him up a little bit of a torch and he started a-walking it on to the inside. And as he got all far into the inside, he just started sitting down by himself and started to thinking, "Oh, I don't think there's anybody around." He got real quiet. He looked inside. He looked around. He listened real quietly. Nope, nobody around. I guess this ought to be the place that I get to enjoy all that misery all by myself. And so Jack, why, he just started peeling that around, and as he started peeling it around and started to open it up, why, there came right out of that sack this mist of a thing that came floating all out. And as it did, it started forming right into real Jack Misery. Why, it turned into a great big old giant. He is so big he could barely fit down in there, that cave, and when Jack saw it, it just scared him to death. He started saying, "Oh, where am I at? What am I seeing? I can't see nothing around here. Where am I? Oh, there's a little bit of a, oh, what am I smelling? Oh, I know what I'm smelling." And he started a grabbing and a jumping and trying to get to Jack. He just kept a growing, and Jack kept a running. Run right out of that cave, and that old giant had to plow himself out on his hands and knees. Jack knowed he wouldn't be able to outrun it, and so he just started figuring out what he could do. He knew if he just stopped, that giant would get him and eat him up. He just started running around that mountain. He got up on a rock, decided he'd climb up a great big old tree. And when he did, that old giant got up there next to it. Jack got higher and higher and higher and higher. He got so far high up that giant couldn't quite reach him. And that old giant says, "Oh, that's okay. I'll be able to get him down. I just got to get me something to whack this tree over." And while he was gone, Jack knew he had to get out of there quick. He just started coming down that tree as fast as he could. When he hit the ground, he just took off to running as fast as he could. Why, that giant come back, and he took a big old whack with an old stone axe that he had made real quick, knocked that tree right over, and started searching up through it, looking for him something to eat. And sure enough, Jack was gone. Why, Jack was running as fast as he could this time. He looked up there and he seen what he could do, and he's like, "Oh, I'll just have to get down in this water. Maybe he won't see me here." And that old giant started stomping around and walking around and looking around. He'd seen Jack running into the stick of the woods, and so he started to move in that way. He got inside close to where that old pond was and couldn't see nothing nowhere. He was just looking around and looking around, and he just stood there and stood there and stood there, and Jack couldn't hold his breath no more. Why, he come up for just a little bit of a breath, just try to put his lips up through the water, just get a little bit, try to get back down, and that giant spotted him, splashed down in the water, hit so hard, big old wave pushed Jack right out of that pond and out onto the ground. Jack hit the ground a-running. He was a-flying, and he was a-crying, and he was a-running as fast as he could. And he's going, "Oh, misery am I. Oh, what have I done? Oh, I don't know if I'm going to get out of here." And Jack just started a-running as fast as he could. Why, that old giant just kept coming and following, and Jack didn't know where he'd go or how fast he'd get out of there. He run up there, decided he'd try to get in behind some boulders, and cried into a little bit of a creek on there next to the big old mountain as he was going on to the inside. And that old giant just started grabbing boulders and pulling them off and opening it up, and pretty soon Jack was way back in a little bit of a crevice, and that giant's hand was grabbing in this way and grabbing in that way, and finally it pushed on Jack and it knocked him over, and he just couldn't get away, and that old giant just pulled him out. And Jack was saying, "Oh, oh, what are you going to do with me now?" Oh, he goes, "Well, I'm going to eat you, of course. Why, you smell pretty good, but I know you ain't for smelling. No, you're for eating. I just got to get you back home. All I got to do is figure out where to go. I seem to be in the wrong place." Jack says, "Oh, well, in that the case, then I can tell you where to go. I think I remember where you come from." "Oh," and Jack just said, "Why, you got to go down the road here off the mountain." That giant just followed him right on down. He says, "Oh, you got to go up here through this little bit of a valley." That giant clomped right on through it. Says, "Oh, now you got to get up here into the forest," and he come up that way. And as he got closer and darker and deeper into the woods, and as they traveled, day started turning into night. And as he was walking, Jack could see that little bit of a light that was in that window of that old blue-bearded man. Jack had led that giant right back to him. why Jack was just a praying and just a hoping and just a doing anything that he might get released from the misery that he found himself in. And when he got close to that pass, he said, "Oh, this is not my place. Where'd you take me to?" He says, "Oh, I'll take you to the old blue-bearded man. He's the one that got to be here, and he's the one that can get you back." That old giant said, "Sure, Jack, sure, I'll get there." And whenever he got down there close, that old blue-bearded man come out, and he looked up down and said, "Why, I didn't expect you back so soon, Jack. Are you enjoying all that misery you wanted?" And Jack said, "Oh, no, no, no. I don't want misery. I really don't want misery. Not misery like this. I was wanting that gold kind of misery that came in that thing the bear was a-eating, and it tasted so sweet." "Oh," he says, "you mean honey. Why didn't you ask for it? I could have given you the very thing that you wanted, but I just had to give you what you asked for because you really thought you knew what you wanted." That old giant didn't know what was going on. In fact, he seen one in one hand, decided he might grab him another, reached down and grabbed that old blue-bearded man. Now he had one in both hands, and he didn't know what to do. That old blue-bearded man just looked right up at that giant and says, "Oh, cousin?" He says, "Oh, uncle." "Hey, cousin." "Oh, uncle, what you want?" "Well, I was a-thinking that if I were a big giant like you, why, I'd be wanting to get the rest of my kinfolk, and there's no way you're going to get back there with the two of us in your hands." "Well, why's that?" "'Cause you're going to have to climb way up over the peak of that mountain down the other side. It's mighty hard, and there's sure some places you can get to, but when you get up against those great big old bluffs, you're going to have both hands to get up over, and why, you're just going to have to let us down so you can go, 'cause you probably want to be with your kinfolk more than you want to be eating us." "Well, I guess I do." And that old giant just sat him back down, and whenever the blue-bearded man pointed him exactly where to go, that giant just took out trying to get back to where his kinfolks. Because if you don't know anything about giants, they always like being together best than anything else. And so that giant went and got exactly what he wanted. And Jack just sat there and looked at that blue-bearded man and said, "I can't believe it. Can't believe it. Why, I just nearly died 100 deaths. I was so miserable, and why, you set me up. You're the very one who got that all misery to me." He says, "Well," the blue-bearded man said, "wasn't my fault. It's what you wanted. I was just giving you what you wanted." Jack said, "Well, you knew what I really wanted." He said, "Yes, I did. But it wasn't what you were asking for." "Okay." He says, "Do you trust me, Jack?" "Yes." "Well, then you ought to just listen to me and go. Now, if you want what you really need, why, you need to follow this trail right on down to the creek. Go across that creek to the other side, and there'll be a little game trail off to your left. Follow that little game trail around until you get to a briar patch. Don't go into it, but go around it to the right, and there'll be a big rock. Stand up on top of that rock and look straight up, and there'll be a great big old honey hive a-waiting for you. But just remember, them bees don't sting a bear, but they might sting you." And Jack took off. Why, he got there, and as he started going along, he started thinking more and more about what he might do and how he might get that old thing. And finally, he decided to get him an old stick. When he got there, he whacked that old hive off, and he ran down and hid in the water for a while. And after all the bees was gone, he come back up, and he wrapped up that old hive in a bunch of old leaves that he'd found, and he brought it back on home. And when his mama and his brothers cracked open that old hive over a great big old pan, they drained out all the honey from it, and Jack told his tale. And I'm telling you this tale because sometimes when we come to God, we think we know what we want and we ask for what we want when God knows it's really not what we need or what we really want. And sometimes it's always best just to trust God to lead us to what we really need and want. And that's the end of that.